Ma'am, could you scoot over a little? Margaret Wilson didn't answer. She just slid her casserole dish to the center of the table and moved her chair back, quietly, like she was trying not to take up space. 73, widowed, sharp as ever. The kind of woman who used to walk into a room and make it warmer. Tonight, she felt like she brought the wrong kind of heat. At Sunridge Palms, one of those retirement communities outside Phoenix where everyone knows your dog's name before they know yours, potluck night was supposed to be safe. Familiar, easy laughter, plastic plates, a little too much potato salad, the same jokes, the same songs playing too loud from someone's phone. Margaret used to love it. She used to be the first one there, sleeves rolled up, teasing the men at the grill, inviting the new residents to sit with her. She did chair yoga on Tuesdays, bingo on Fridays, church brunch on Sundays. She wasn't lonely. She was involved. But lately, something had shifted. Not in her body, not in her mind, in the space around her. A woman she'd known for 2 years stood instead of sitting beside her. A man angled his shoulders away mid-conversation, like he suddenly remembered an appointment. Someone cracked a window, fast, then smiled like it was just stuffiness. No one said a word. That's the part that stung. Because if they'd laughed, if they'd teased, if they'd been honest, Margaret could have fought back, fixed it, asked questions, but silence is a verdict you can't appeal. On the drive home, she kept one hand on the steering wheel and the other gripping the cardigan on the passenger seat. She leaned over at a red light and took a cautious breath near the collar. There it was. Not sweat, not perfume. Something faint, oily, older. Like fabric that never fully dries. Like a room that's been lived in too long. Margaret sat in her dark kitchen after midnight, staring at her hands like they belonged to somebody else. And she made a decision. One that might sound small, but to anyone over 40, it isn't. She was going to find out what was happening. And before this story ends, I'm going to show you 5 specific places most older adults miss in the shower. 5 places that quietly trap the odor that makes people step back. Not yet. First, you need to see what Margaret did next. Margaret told herself she was imagining things. That's what adults do. They don't panic. They explain things away. It's probably just the heat. It's Arizona. Everyone sweats. People were just tired tonight. But the room told a different story. At the potluck table, conversations didn't stop when she arrived. They thinned. Sentences shortened. Eye contact broke early. People nodded instead of leaning in. A woman she'd laughed with for years shifted her chair. Just a few inches. Enough to notice, not enough to question. Someone switched seats halfway through dessert. Another guest stood up to check on the coffee, even though the coffee was right there. No one was rude. No one was cruel. That was the problem. Margaret smiled the entire time. She laughed at the right moments. She even told a story, one she'd told before, and noticed how quickly it ended. Short replies, polite exits. She became background noise in her own life. On the drive home, she rolled the window down, even though the air outside was still warm. She told herself she needed fresh air. She didn't. At a red light, she lifted her coat and leaned in, slowly, cautiously, like she was afraid of what she might confirm. The smell wasn't strong. That's what made it unsettling. It wasn't sweat. It wasn't sharp. It wasn't dirty. It was faint, oily, slightly old, like fabric that's been washed too many times and never fully lets go. Back home, she hung the coat over a chair and sat across from it, staring. She waited. She smelled again. There it was. Margaret pressed her lips together and felt something she hadn't felt in years. Shame. Not the dramatic kind. The quiet kind. The kind that makes you replay every interaction. The kind that convinces you not to ask questions. The kind that tells you to fix it alone. Or disappear politely. She thought about calling her daughter. She didn't. Because there's no easy way to ask, do I smell old? And here's the part most people don't realize. For millions of older adults, that smell isn't coming from being unclean. It's coming from just a few specific places on the body that quietly get missed, year after year, every time they shower. Today, I'm going to show you exactly where those spots are. 5 of them. 5 overlooked bathroom habits that trap tuninol on your skin and make that smell significantly worse, without you ever noticing. Fix all 5, and within just 2 weeks, studies show the odor can be reduced by up to 70%. Before we continue, take a moment to like this video and comment your age below, because what Margaret felt that night, chances are someone you love has felt it too. And the next step explains why. The next morning, Margaret didn't search for answers. She searched for control. She turned the shower hotter than usual and stayed under it longer than she needed to. 10 minutes became 20. She scrubbed until her skin felt tight, almost squeaky. If effort could fix this, she was ready to work. She switched body wash, then switched again. Antibacterial, extra strength. Fresh scent, clinical clean. Nothing changed, so she added perfume. Just a little at first, then more, a spray on her wrists, another at her neck, one on her sweater before she left the house. It felt reassuring, like armor. But by midday, the smell didn't disappear. It thickened. The sweetness of the perfume mixed with something underneath it, something heavier, oilier, older. Margaret noticed it in the quiet moments. When she sat down, when she stood up, when the air around her stopped moving. She did laundry constantly. Towels, sweaters, coats, even clothes she'd worn for less than an hour. She changed detergents, bought fabric softener she'd never used before, added extra rinse cycles, convinced that if everything around her smelled clean, she would too. But the smell followed her. Not loudly, persistently. So she did what many older adults do without ever talking about it. She started shrinking her life. She skipped yoga, telling herself her knees needed rest. She ignored the reminder for Sunday church brunch. When a neighbor knocked to invite her for coffee, she said she wasn't feeling well. None of it was a lie, but it wasn't the truth either. The truth was, Margaret didn't trust the space around her anymore. She didn't know how far the smell traveled. She didn't know when it appeared. And she didn't know how to stop it. So staying home felt safer. At least there, no one leaned away. No one opened a window. No one went quiet. One evening, she caught her reflection in the bathroom mirror. Damp hair, pink skin, clean towel over her shoulder. She looked fine. Healthy, clean, normal. And yet, something was wrong. Margaret let out a slow breath and said it out loud, barely above a whisper. Maybe this is just what happens when you get old. Not angry, not bitter, resigned. Like someone accepting a rule they didn't agree with but felt powerless to change. And that belief, that quiet surrender, is exactly why so many people stay stuck. Because once you believe nothing can be done, you stop looking for the right solution. A week later, Margaret sat on the paper-covered exam table at her primary care clinic, feet dangling slightly above the floor. This wasn't an emergency visit. No pain, no fever, no crisis. Just one of those routine checkups you schedule because you're supposed to. When the nurse came in, mid-40s, calm voice, eyes that actually looked at you, Margaret almost didn't say anything. She almost stuck to blood pressure and cholesterol. Almost. Then, as the nurse typed notes into the computer, Margaret hesitated and said, "This might sound strange." The nurse turned her chair around. Fully. That mattered. Margaret took a breath. "I feel clean," she said. "But lately, I don't always smell that way." No flinch, no awkward pause, just a small nod. "That's actually very common," the nurse said, "especially as we get older." Margaret blinked. "It is?" The nurse smiled, not the polite kind, the knowing kind. She explained it simply. As we age, our skin changes. It produces more sebum, the natural oil meant to protect us. That oil contains something called omega-7 fatty acids. When we're younger, our skin has stronger antioxidant defenses. Those defenses keep the oil stable, but after about 40, those defenses weaken. So when omega-7 sits on the surface of the skin and meets oxygen in the air, it oxidizes. That process creates a compound called 2-nonenal. Margaret didn't remember the name at first. She remembered what came next. Here's the important part, the nurse said. 2-nonenal is oil-based. Water doesn't remove it well. Regular soap struggles with it. Margaret frowned. So, showering longer doesn't help? Not really, the nurse said gently. She gave Margaret an example that clicked instantly. Think about oil in a frying pan. You can rinse it with water all day. The pan still feels slick. You need something that actually cuts through the oil. Then another. Or a dirty kitchen towel. You can dry clean dishes with it, but if the towel itself holds grease, you're just spreading it back onto everything. Margaret felt her shoulders drop. Not because the problem was worse than she thought. Because it finally made sense. The nurse leaned back slightly. This isn't about being lazy. It's not about poor hygiene. And it's definitely not about not trying hard enough. Margaret swallowed. All the things you did, showering more, scrubbing harder, using stronger products, they're exactly what most people do, and they usually make the situation worse. Because I was just covering it, Margaret said quietly. The nurse nodded. Covering it, not removing it. She explained that 2-nonenal doesn't spread evenly across the body. It concentrates in specific places. Places that tend to get missed, rushed, or assumed clean because water passes over them. Margaret thought about the hours she'd spent trying to fix the problem. All the effort, all the self-blame, and how none of it addressed the real cause. For the first time in weeks, she didn't feel embarrassed. She felt informed. And once you understand the problem, the solution stops feeling impossible. Margaret didn't leave the clinic with a prescription. She left with something better. Clarity. For the first time in weeks, she sat in her car and didn't rush to turn the key. She just rested her hands on the steering wheel and breathed. Slowly, deeply. Nothing about her body had changed in that exam room. But the way she saw herself had. She wasn't careless. She wasn't failing. She wasn't letting herself go. She had been doing exactly what most responsible adults do when something feels off. Trying harder. And now she knew why that hadn't worked. What surprised her most wasn't the science. It was the relief. Relief from self-blame. Relief from that quiet voice that kept asking, "What's wrong with me?" The nurse hadn't talked down to her, hadn't rushed her, hadn't made it awkward. She explained the problem like it was what it actually was, a normal biological change that comes with age. Margaret felt respected, and respect does something powerful. It turns shame into focus. As she drove home, she didn't replay the potluck dinner anymore. She didn't picture people stepping away. She didn't imagine conversations ending early. Instead, she thought about what the nurse had said. That the odor wasn't everywhere, that it wasn't random, that it didn't require harsher soap or longer showers. It required attention, in the right places. 5 of them. 5 specific areas where oil-based odor quietly builds up over time, even on people who shower every single day. Margaret realized something important in that moment. She didn't need to disappear. She didn't need to avoid people. And she definitely didn't need to scrub herself raw. She just needed to stop guessing. She realized she didn't need to scrub harder. She needed to scrub smarter. And once you know that, everything changes. Margaret didn't change everything overnight. She did what the nurse suggested. Start with the easiest fix, the one that quietly ruins all the other effort. Because if you miss this, it doesn't matter how long you shower. Habit number 1. Reusing the same bath towel for too long. Margaret thought she was being practical. She lived alone. She showered daily. She hung her towel neatly. "It's just me," she'd say. "How dirty can it get?" So she used the same towel for a week. Sometimes longer. And here's the trap. A towel doesn't just dry water. It absorbs whatever is still on your skin. Oil, dead skin cells, microscopic bacteria, and most importantly, the compounds that don't rinse away easily. If that odor compound is oil-based, the towel becomes a storage unit for it. Then, the next morning, you step out of the shower, clean, and you rub that towel all over your body. You don't remove the odor, you reapply it. Margaret didn't believe that at first. She lifted the towel to her nose and smelled nothing. But that's another trap. Olfactory adaptation. After you're around a scent for a day, your brain turns down the volume. You stop noticing it. That doesn't mean it's gone. It means you've adjusted. So Margaret made a simple rule. Every 2 to 3 days, the towel goes in the wash. No exceptions. And between uses, she didn't drape it on a hook in a damp fold. She spread it out so it could actually dry. When she washed towels, she used hot water. And once a week, she added white vinegar to the load. Not because it's trendy, but because it helps cut residue that clings to fabric. The first time she did this, she noticed something almost immediately. Not a miracle, a difference. Her skin smelled neutral, like clean skin, not clean plus something. And that's when she understood what the nurse meant. Stop working harder, start working smarter. Then came the second habit, one that explained why the smell kept returning even after good showers. Habit number 2, ignoring the back of the neck, behind the hairline, and the collar zone. Margaret had always washed her face carefully. Her hands naturally went to what she could see, but the nurse had asked her a question that stuck. Where does your pillow touch every night? Where does your collar sit all day? The back of the neck, behind the hairline, the area where sweat dries quietly and skin oil builds up without obvious grime. Margaret realized something uncomfortable. She had been letting shampoo run down and calling that clean. So she changed one small thing. In the shower before rinsing, she took a washcloth and scrubbed the back of her neck, firmly, not aggressively, for about 10 seconds. Then she ran the cloth along the collar line, the sides of the neck where fabric rubs, and the spot right under the hairline. Not long, not dramatic, just deliberate. After the shower, she didn't rush the drying. She patted that area completely dry, because damp skin plus trapped oil is exactly what Odor loves. Within days, Margaret noticed her pillowcase stayed fresher longer. Her cardigan collar didn't hold that faint, stale note by the end of the day. Even her living room felt different, because when you stop carrying the smell on your neck and collar, you stop transferring it to your couch, your car seat, your favorite chair. 2 habits in, and Margaret wasn't just cleaner, she was calmer. Because for the first time, she wasn't guessing. And she still had 3 more areas to fix. 3 more places most people miss every day for years. Habit number 3, feet, and how the smell spreads to your entire home. Margaret never thought her feet had anything to do with it. They didn't hurt, they didn't itch, they didn't smell bad. So she treated them the way many older adults do. She let soapy water run over them and moved on. But the nurse had explained something that changed how Margaret saw her own house. Each foot contains over 250,000 sweat glands, more than anywhere else on the body. Even when you're not exercising, your feet sweat. Quietly, constantly. That moisture mixes with oil, dead skin, and bacteria. Now add one very American detail. Carpet. Margaret wore slippers around the house. She walked from the bathroom to the kitchen, from the kitchen to the couch, from the couch to bed. Feet, carpet, all day. And when the air conditioner kicked on, like it does almost year-round in Arizona, it pulled air across those fibers and circulated it. The smell didn't stay on her feet. It moved. That explained why the living room sometimes smelled off, even after cleaning. Why the bedroom felt stale even with clean sheets. There's another factor most people don't realize. Studies from U.S. podiatric associations show that nearly 2/3 of adults over 60 have some level of fungal growth on their feet, often without pain or visible symptoms. Fungus doesn't always announce itself. It just smells. Margaret changed one thing. She bought a long-handled foot brush. Nothing fancy. And every shower she scrubbed the bottoms of her feet, her heels, and, most importantly, between her toes. Not fast, not rushed. Then she dried them completely. Every toe. Every time. Once a week, she used an antifungal powder, not because she felt infected, but because prevention is easier than repair. Within days, the smell in her house changed. Not fresh, just gone. And when the house stops carrying the odor, you stop carrying it with you. Habit number 4. The groin area. Caring for a place people are afraid to talk about. This was the habit Margaret hesitated on. Not because she didn't understand it, but because no one ever taught her how to think about it without embarrassment. As we age, the groin area becomes a perfect storm. More heat, less airflow, skin folds, and hours spent sitting. In warmer climates especially, moisture doesn't fully evaporate. It lingers. Margaret had always rinsed that area with water and assumed that was enough. She didn't want irritation. She didn't want to overdo it. But here's the quiet truth. Water alone doesn't remove oil-based residue. And moisture left behind feeds bacteria. This isn't about shame. It's about maintenance. Margaret switched to a mild, fragrance-free soap. She cleaned gently, thoroughly, and without rushing. She paid attention to skin folds, not aggressively, just intentionally. Afterward, she dried the area completely before getting dressed. That was the key. Clean skin isn't dry skin. Dry skin is protected skin. She also made one practical adjustment. She changed underwear daily without exception and avoided fabrics that trapped heat. The result wasn't dramatic. It was subtle. Her clothes felt fresher at the end of the day. The faint sour note she used to catch in the evening was gone. No embarrassment required. Just care. Habit number 5. The upper back, the place that changes everything. This was the habit that made Margaret stop mid-shower, because once she understood it, everything else clicked. As we age, flexibility decreases. Reaching the middle of the upper back becomes harder, so most people let water run down and assume that's enough. It isn't. The upper back contains a high concentration of oil-producing glands, second only to the face. That oil sits, it oxidizes, and it stays there, day after day. Margaret realized she hadn't truly scrubbed that area in years. She bought a long-handled back brush. And for the first time, she scrubbed the space between her shoulder blades, not aggressively, just thoroughly, for about 20 seconds. That was it. Within a week, the change was unmistakable. Her shirt stayed fresh longer. Her bra didn't carry odor. Her sheets smelled like clean fabric, not something underneath. This was the spot, the one that made her say, out loud, in the shower, "Oh, that's it." Because once you fix the place where the oil builds up the most, the rest of the body stops fighting a losing battle. Margaret didn't feel like she had fixed a smell. She felt like she had fixed a misunderstanding. Margaret didn't overhaul her life. She didn't make a chart. She didn't buy a dozen new products. She didn't tell herself she had to fix everything by Monday. She made small changes, one at a time. First, the towel routine. Then the neck and collar. Then her feet. Then the areas she'd always rushed through. Each habit settled in quietly, like a new rhythm. What surprised her wasn't how much effort it took. It was how little. Within a few days, her clothes felt different. Not freshly scented, just clean. When she pulled a sweater over her head, there was no hesitation. No quick inhale to check. A week later, she noticed her favorite chair didn't carry that faint, stale note anymore. The cushion smelled like fabric, like nothing. Her living room felt lighter, not visually, emotionally. She stopped cracking windows automatically. She stopped worrying about how long someone might sit beside her. The space around her felt neutral again. Safe. And something else changed. She moved differently. She stood closer when she talked to people. She didn't angle her body away. She didn't keep her arms folded across her chest like a barrier. None of this happened all at once. But one morning, she realized she wasn't thinking about the smell anymore. Not because she was avoiding it, because it wasn't there. Margaret didn't feel fixed. She felt free, free to sit, free to invite, free to exist in her own space without calculating distance. And that freedom set the stage for what came next. Margaret went back to the potluck on a Thursday evening. Not to prove anything, not to test herself. She just went. She placed her dish on the table and took a seat without scanning the room, without calculating space, without rehearsing exits. And something was different immediately. No one stepped back. A chair scraped closer instead of farther away. Someone leaned in mid-conversation. Another person stayed seated through dessert. The room didn't shift around her anymore. Halfway through the meal, a woman Margaret barely knew smiled and said casually, "You smell nice." Just that, no follow-up, no explanation needed. Margaret smiled back and thanked her, the way people do when a moment doesn't need to be made bigger than it is. Inside, something settled. She didn't feel triumphant. She didn't feel relieved. She felt normal. And that was everything. Because the real victory wasn't the absence of a smell. It was the return of belonging. Margaret stayed longer that night. She laughed. She lingered. She didn't watch the door. She walked out with leftovers and conversation still ringing in her ears. And for the first time in a long while, she didn't carry herself like someone waiting to be excused. Getting older changes your body. That part is natural. Your skin chemistry shifts. Your oil production changes. Your body starts producing something called tunanol, a compound that is a normal part of aging. You cannot eliminate it entirely. But here's what most people are never told. You can control approximately 90% of it through just 5 simple habits. Habits that match the body you have today, not the one you had 20 years ago. What Margaret learned wasn't about fighting age. It was about understanding it. Because odor isn't a personal failure, it's not laziness, and it's not something to feel ashamed of. It's information. Once you have the right knowledge, small changes create huge improvements. Not just in how you smell, but in how confident you feel standing close to people again. Aging doesn't mean disappearing. It doesn't mean stepping back or shrinking your life. It means adjusting with care, dignity, and intention. If this story helped you understand your own body a little better, take a moment to like this video and subscribe for more health advice made specifically for older adults. And I'd love to hear from you. How often do you currently change your bath towels? Thank you for watching. Stay confident, stay fresh, take good care of yourself, and remember, aging is natural and nothing to be ashamed of. But old people's smell is optional. You have the power to control it.